The wooden director's chair sits empty on the dimly lit soundstage. A weathered cowboy hat rests on the arm, catching the faint glow of a single spotlight. The iconic silhouette is unmistakable, even in absence. What happens when one of Hollywood's most enduring legends reaches his mid-90s in an industry that rarely celebrates longevity? How does a man who built his career on unflinching strength navigate the inevitable vulnerabilities of advanced age? And what really happens behind closed doors when the cameras stop rolling for someone who's spent over 7 decades in their unforgiving glare? Stay tuned, because by the end of this story, you'll know exactly what happened to Clint Eastwood at 95, and where things stand as of September 2025. Let's dive in. The name Clint Eastwood conjures immediate images. The squinting gunslinger, the rogue cop with the .44 Magnum, the grizzled director behind the camera calling action with characteristic brevity. For generations of moviegoers, he has embodied a particular brand of American masculinity: stoic, determined, and uncompromising. Born during the Great Depression, his career has spanned from television westerns to Academy Award-winning directorial triumphs, creating a body of work few can match in breadth or influence. Yet as Eastwood entered his 95th year, whispers began circulating through Hollywood about what was happening with the legendary filmmaker. The man who once famously addressed an empty chair became increasingly private. His public appearances grew rarer, leaving fans and industry insiders wondering about his health, his creative future, and whether he would ever step behind the camera again. But to understand the present, we have to go back to the beginning. He did not come from the glitter of Hollywood. Clint Eastwood, born May 31, 1930 in San Francisco, came of age amid the uncertainty of the Great Depression, as his family bounced across Northern California in search of steady work. That rootless childhood forged a certain resilience, a clarity about what mattered and what didn't. He was tall, quiet, a little awkward. No one watching the young man caddying on golf courses or hauling brush as a forest firefighter would have predicted that the same kid would one day become the emblem of a certain American myth, the loner carrying his own code into a complicated world. He wasn't shaped by theater classes or destiny written in stage lights. He drifted through practical jobs, served stateside during the Korean War, and then, almost by accident, stepped within reach of the studio system. Universal signed him in the mid-1950s, dropped him soon after, and some executives shrugged off his prospects. It could have ended there. It didn't. The first big pivot was television. In 1959, he became Rowdy Yates on CBS's Rawhide, a gig that ran for years, long enough to turn repetition into craft. On that dusty trail, Eastwood learned rhythm, economy, and how to let the camera find him when he didn't push. He developed what would become a signature: minimal dialogue, maximal presence. And then came the decision that rewrote his story: the trip to Europe. Sergio Leone's Dollars Trilogy. A fistful of dollars, for a few dollars more, the good, the bad, and the ugly, took an American Western archetype, twisted it under a Mediterranean sun, and minted a global icon. The Man with No Name was laconic, morally ambiguous, and utterly magnetic. Eastwood returned to the United States not just as a star, but as a man who understood leverage. He had something Hollywood wanted. He would trade it for something he wanted more: control. Control, for Eastwood, meant doing it his way. As his star rose in the early 1970s, he stepped into contemporary America as Detective Harry Callahan in 1971's Dirty Harry. It was impossible to ignore. The glare, the line, "Do you feel lucky?" The hard-edged certainty of a man who wouldn't be stopped. For some it was a thrilling corrective, for others a dangerous flirtation with vigilantism. Either way, it branded him. And while the world debated the politics of Harry Callahan, Eastwood quietly changed careers. In that same year he directed Play Misty for Me, a tight psychological thriller that announced something he'd prove again and again. He could tell a story from the other side of the lens, efficiently, economically, and without drama. Within a few years he formed Malpaso, his own production company, to shepherd the films he wanted made. The move wasn't just a smart business, it was a declaration: I'll take the risk, and I'll take the heat. Of course, nothing about the 70s and 80s came without complications. The violence in his films drew cultural fire. Critics pegged him as right-wing. Supporters saw him as a critic of bureaucratic paralysis. Then, in the late 1980s, Eastwood did something that hardly fit any Hollywood script. He ran for office and served as mayor of Carmel by the Sea from 1986 to 1988. It was local, unglamorous, and very much him, pragmatic, results-oriented, uninterested in theater unless it served the audience, his constituents. Behind the scenes, he built a different kind of myth, one crew member at a time. An Eastwood set is famously quiet. No bullhorn, no circus. He favors the first take when it sings, hates wasting time when it doesn't, and treats actors like partners rather than chess pieces. His two favorite words on a sweet take? That's enough. Over decades, he cultivated a loyal circle of collaborators, editors, cinematographers, composers, sound teams, people who could set their watches by the rhythm of a Malpaso day. And that one-and-done ethos, far from laziness, is rooted in preparation. He trusts rehearsal, intuition, and what the camera gets when an actor is still alive with discovery. Then came the pivot that turned respect into reverence. In 1992, Unforgiven arrived like a thunderclap. It wasn't just another Western, it was a reckoning, an old gunslinger facing consequence, regret, and the human cost of myth-making. The Academy took notice. Eastwood won Best Director and Best Picture, not by beating the genre at its own game, but by challenging the premise of the game itself. 12 years later, he did it again with $1 Million Baby, a film about ambition, chosen family, and a coach whose toughness hides a heart that breaks. That second pair of Oscars put him in rare air and made him, at 74, the oldest Best Director winner to that point. The message, to anyone keeping score, no, he was not done. He was still getting better. If the 1990s cemented Eastwood the auteur, the 2000s and 2010s proved he could adapt without sacrificing identity. He tackled moral ambiguity in Mystic River, empathy in Letters from Iwo Jima, the fraught heroism of American Sniper, and the human scale of extraordinary competence in Sully. He stepped in front of the camera again for Gran Torino and The Mule, not to cosplay his youth but to test what his age could do on screen, grit mellowed by wear, prejudice thawed by proximity, pride re-sculpted by humility. He even composed and supervised music on several projects, the lifelong jazz fan turning piano sketches into themes that feel like midnight conversations. If you listen closely to Mystic River and $1 Million Baby, you can hear a director thinking in melody, giving his stories a second voice. Of course, the public image isn't only made at premieres and on sets. In 2012, at the Republican National Convention, Eastwood improvised that now-famous conversation with an empty chair. It was strange, meme-ready, and polarizing, a collision between Hollywood event craft and political theater that overshadowed everything else that night. For some, it revealed an old man adrift. For others, it was a wry jab at power. For everyone, it reminded us that the line between persona and person is never neat, and Eastwood has never been interested in smoothing it. So where does this story land in 2024 to 2025, the years when whispers about retirement and health reached their loudest pitch? Here's the thing. At 94, in the fall of 2024, Eastwood premiered his 40th film as a director, Juror No. 2, closing AFI Fest in Los Angeles before Warner Brothers released it in the U.S. that November. Reviews were solid to warm, admiring the film's classical restraint in an era of noise. But the release pattern was curious. Robust in the UK, far more limited in American theaters, and then quickly oriented toward the streaming runway. For admirers, it felt like a quiet bow from a master. For skeptics, a sign that studios sometimes fail their legends. Either way, the work existed. It bore his fingerprints, an adult story about responsibility, choice, and the cost of truth. Then the rumor mill revved. In late May 2025, an interview in an Austrian newspaper ricocheted across entertainment sites. Eastwood reportedly said he was already prepping another film, railing against franchise culture with lines tailor-made for click-driven headlines. Weeks later, he issued a statement calling the interview phony. He hadn't given it. In the vacuum where certainty once lived, speculation breeds. But as of September 2025, here's what's verifiable. Juror No. 2 is out in the world. Eastwood remains a living link to Hollywood history, and no official, on-the-record new project has been announced by him or his studio. If anything else is coming, he'll let the work say so first. And what about the man beyond the marquees? The public glimpses in 2025 show a leaner figure, moving more carefully, but with that dry, mischievous glint intact. Friends and colleagues tend to repeat the same phrases. No fuss, early to set, trusts his team. The days are structured differently now, more sitting than striding, more conversation than sprinting, but the mind is there, measuring shots, listening for rhythm, fixing a scene with one adjustment that saves an hour. If the old legend once wore myth like armor, the older legend wears craft like a second skin. He has help because he's earned it, and because that's how serious work gets done at any age. Malpaso, founded in the late 1960s, isn't just a company name on a title card. It's an ecosystem of long relationships. Editors who know what his eyes tell them before he speaks. Camera crews who anticipate the angle he'll choose before he picks a lens. Producers who understand that an Eastwood day costs less not because he cuts corners, but because he doesn't waste time. That's the Depression-era ethic still alive. Do it right the first time. Or, at least, the first time that matters. Legacy is a slippery word in Hollywood. Sometimes it means box office. The billions stacked across 6 decades. Sometimes it means awards. The 4 Oscars, the lifetime honors, the respective peers who know how hard it is to finish anything, let alone finish well. And sometimes it means something less quantifiable, the chance you give the next person to do their best work. Eastwood's independence, owning his process, protecting his sets, resisting bloat, gave other actor-directors a blueprint. He proved you can be both popular and personal, both frugal and expansive, both genre-savvy and morally complicated. The man who once embodied a myth dismantled it from within, showing that strength isn't invulnerability, it's steadiness under truth. But here's where it gets complicated, because legacy isn't one story, it's a chorus. The supposed conservative also made films that interrogate war from multiple angles, elevated environmental and spiritual themes in Pale Rider and Letters from Iwo Jima, and questioned American certainty in Richard Jewell. The on-screen loner built a decades-long family of collaborators. The one-take taskmaster is also the director who gives actors room to surprise him. And the icon of rugged silence is, privately, a musician who understands that sometimes the best note in a score is the space between notes, the pause that lets you feel what you've just seen. What about the personal ledger, the part the tabloids love and the fans handle with care? He's the father of 8, a clan with artists and actors and musicians among them, a family that becomes visible on red carpets, in occasional cameos, in photos from Carmel around the Mission Ranch he preserved. The details are theirs, not ours, but the outline is public. A life complicated like anyone's, magnified by fame, steadied by work. What matters for our story is that in this late chapter, family is part of the scaffolding. Support, presence, and, when needed, gatekeeping against a world that always wants one more look. And health? The honest answer is the human one. Time wins every race. You see it in the careful steps, the smaller movements, the shift from striding to letting others carry the heavier pieces. But you also see something else. A curiosity that hasn't dimmed. The eyes still search. The questions still form. What's the cleanest way to get this shot? Where's the truth in the scene? What happens if we say less and trust the audience more? This is the craftsperson's defense against aging, not denial, but adaptation. He directs from a chair that swivels instead of a saddle that bucks, but the eye is the same eye. The industry around him, meanwhile, has changed almost past recognition. The mid-budget adult drama, the kind Eastwood mastered, has a narrower theatrical runway than it used to. The Juror No. 2 release story made that plain. In the U.S., a muted theatrical footprint. Overseas, a stronger push. Quickly, the gravitational pull of streaming. It's not a verdict on the film so much as a diagnosis of the business. And yet, in that context, Eastwood's steady hand feels almost radical. A refusal to chase a trend. A belief that story and performance still matter even when spectacle is the currency of the day. He has never been a sentimentalist about endings. In his films, endings are earned, rarely tidy, often threaded with regret. If this is his final act behind the camera, it makes a kind of poetic sense that the last image is of a juror wrestling with conscience, an ordinary man deciding what he can live with. If there's another project, we'll know when it rolls. He himself swatted down a viral interview this summer as fabricated, a reminder to treat rumor like smoke. The work has always been his clarifying answer. As of September 2025, that answer stands. Juror number 2 is on the shelf with the rest. And the man whose films taught generations to read faces can still lift a corner of his mouth and make an audience lean in to see if that's a smile. Numbers can tell part of the tale. The Oscar shelf says 4. The filmography stacks to around 40 directed features, with acting roles stretching yet further. The audience's number in the billions over 60-plus years. The net worth guesses? Treat them like what they are. Outside estimates for a private man. Depending on who you ask, it hovers in the mid-hundreds of millions. The more telling metrics are subtler. How often he brought films in on schedule and under budget. How many careers got their first or best turn on a Malpaso set. How many scenes landed because he trusted the first honest take. So, what happened to Clint Eastwood at 95? The same thing that happens to anyone who keeps going long enough with purpose. The world around him got louder. He got quieter. The machines got bigger. He pared down. The culture turned toward youth. He kept faith with experience. He traded the horse for the headset. The looming close-up for the close listen. He let the voice inside that always told him when a scene had enough be his guide on when a career had enough. Not because he couldn't chase one more, but because he knew when a line lands best if you don't hammer it. And yet, this is the trick, he never quite says cut on the curiosity. Friends say he still screens movies, still argues about what works and what doesn't, still plays the piano, still disappears into the Monterey night to breathe the ocean air that smells like the first drafts of a new scene. The body slows. The eye lingers. But the instinct that made him a director, the ability to see the essential and strip away the rest, hasn't retired. If you zoom out, the career reads like a map of post-war American culture. The 1960s grope toward ambiguity, the man with no name. The 1970s backlash and distrust of institutions, Dirty Harry and the arguments he carries with him. The 1990s revision, the hunger to question myths we were raised on, Unforgiven. The 2000s and 2010s ability to find quiet humanity in big headlines, Mystic River, Letters from Iwo Jima, American Sniper, Sully. Through it all, the same steady signature, no wasted motion, no decorative fuss, and a patience with silence that lets the truth settle before anyone moves. By now, you can see the image we opened with a little differently. The empty chair isn't a symbol of absence. It's a marker of presence. It's the shape of a life spent making space for other people to do their best work, then knowing when to step aside and let them. The cowboy hat on the arm isn't costume. It's a reminder that myth is a tool, not a destination. The spotlight doesn't beg. It waits. Because legends don't vanish, they recede into the work they leave behind. What does that mean for September 2025? Practically, it means Eastwood is alive, 95, the director of a 2024 feature that closed AFI Fest and navigated a modern studio's peculiar priorities, the subject of rumor which he himself swatted down, the owner of a legacy robust enough to withstand a fickle marketplace, the father and collaborator whose family remains part of his circle, the musician who still thinks in chords, and the filmmaker whose greatest special effect was always time, waiting an extra beat so an audience could feel something real. In the end, this isn't just a story about Hollywood longevity. It's a story about the power of reinvention and the courage to stay simple when the world gets noisy. It's about an artist who built autonomy not to isolate himself, but to protect the fragile thing at the center of any good film, a human moment that doesn't need help to hit. Eastwood's journey from TV cowboy to revered director offers lessons that transcend the entertainment business. His legendary efficiency, getting what he needs in the fewest steps, feels almost radical now. His late career renaissance proves that curiosity is a better fountain of youth than denial. And his complicated public image, politics, privacy, persona, reminds us that in a free society, artists can be both beloved and disputed without losing the thread of their work. The wooden director's chair will eventually remain empty, the spotlight will fade, but the films will endure. As Eastwood's career suggests, it's not about how long you stay, though he stayed longer and stronger than most. It's about what you leave behind. For fans, that means characters and moments that lodge in memory like a song you didn't expect to love. For Hollywood, it means a model of how to do serious work without pretense, how to trust first takes, and how to let silence carry weight. And for the man himself? Maybe it's the quiet satisfaction of knowing that, after 7 decades in a business famous for forgetting, His name will still make a viewer lean forward. The camera lingers one more moment on the empty chair, then slowly fades to black. Somewhere, you can almost hear that familiar voice. That's enough. And somehow, we know it never will be. The stories continue, the films endure, and the impact of one remarkable career reminds us why we fell in love with movies in the first place.